Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today's session on the Enriched Crop Standardisation project and specifically the recently published specification on zinc-enriched wheat, maize and rice grain, PAS 233. We have a fantastic panel of speakers today, all of whom have been involved in the development of the PAS and who are ready to tell you more about it and answer any questions. First, let me introduce Jenny. Jenny Walton represents research organisation Harvest Plus, which originated the project. Jenny, tell us a little more.
Hello everyone. My name's Jenny and I work for Harvest Plus and I'm based at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, DC. And my role is to work with the public and private sector to adopt biofortified grains.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Next, let me introduce Paul Nicholson, Head of Rice Research and Sustainability at Olam International. Great to have you here, Paul. Tell us a bit more about yourself and Olam.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So Olam's a global agribusiness. We're probably best known for working upcountry in developing markets. So we have a large footprint in cocoa, coffee, grains, cotton, edible nuts, and rice, which is the business I work for. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about this advancement and how it relates to us. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Paul. And completing our panel today is Inge Verdonk, an independent consultant on food and nutrition security, representing the Food Fortification Advisory Service funded by the European Union. Inge, please tell us more.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be on this session. I work for the Food Fortification Advisory Services, and this was set up by the EU because they want to look how food fortification and also biofortification or nutrient-enriched crops can help in addressing nutrition problems worldwide and also improving the healthy food system, which is part of the new policy. So we are very interested in what's going on in this session. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Inge. Okay, so you've met the panel and each of our experts are going to share more information with you today. And then we'll be taking questions. Some of them came in before the session, but we do encourage you to ask live questions. Use the chat function for that, and we'll answer as many as we are able to. And any we aren't able to answer in the session, we'll try to answer after the session offline. So let's begin. Jenny's going to start us off to give us some context and background to the project, starting with a short film. So over to you, Jenny, and the film, please.
More than 2 billion people, 1 in 3 persons in the world, suffer from a tragic condition called hidden hunger. Hidden hunger is when a person may appear healthy, but their diet is so low in nutrients and vitamins that they are vulnerable to serious illness and disease. Women and children are particularly at risk. The consequences of hidden hunger are severe: blindness, stunted growth, reduced cognitive development, even a high risk of mothers dying in childbirth. But in the early 1990s, an economist named Howdy Buis had a novel idea. How can we make staple foods more nutritious? By breeding micronutrients into the crops planted by smallholder farming families. His idea was given a big name: biofortification. Today, biofortified foods have improved the diets of over 30 million people and have been grown in over 60 countries. How does the biofortification process work? It begins by studying thousands of seed varieties kept in seed banks around the world to identify naturally nutritious varieties that are high in vitamin A, iron, and zinc, micronutrients essential to a healthy diet. Plant breeders then cross these high vitamin A, zinc, and iron varieties with high-yielding varieties that can be adapted to grow in local regions in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, where they are most needed. Once planted and harvested, all using conventional methods familiar to local farmers, the result is a highly nutritious menu of crops, such as rice, wheat, beans, corn, cassava, and many others. And because the varieties now become part of the food system, they are available year after year, making the biofortification approach both cost-effective and sustainable. While farmers keep most of their yield for eating at home, improving nutrition for their own families, they also sell their surplus in local and urban markets, contributing to their livelihoods while also improving nutrition for their communities. Throughout the process, the biofortified varieties are tested and retested to ensure that these high nutritious crops perform just as well as other high-yielding crops, that they need no more water or fertilizer or any more time to cook, and that they taste good. It is now predicted that by 2030, more than 1 billion people will benefit from biofortification, which is why we believe it all starts with a seed.
Thank you. So we'll go to the slides. So we just saw on the video there about the staggering incidence of hidden hunger and micronutrient malnutrition. So a quarter of the world's population don't get enough vitamins and minerals from their diet. And that's largely because even though there are 50,000 edible plants that we could have access to, just 3 of those 50,000 edible plants make up the majority of our calories. So the pie chart on the left there gives you the picture in India, where you see that 58% of the energy in the diet comes from cereals. So we have the potential to reach everybody in every country if we improve the micronutrient content of the basic staples that we all eat. So if we increase the micronutrient content of the nutrients that we need most of in the foods that we eat the most of, we can do that through biofortification or through nutrient-enriched crops. But we have to be able to tell the difference between what people are consuming now and now the new nutrient-enriched version. So we need standards to be able to distinguish them, and that major route to scale is through telling the difference between the two. Moving on to the next slide. So the standard for grain is a really critical point in the supply chain. So we've looked along the entire value chain in all of the different countries around the world about what standards exist. So there are standards for breeding, so the seed developers know what to aim for. And then right at the other end, there are very good food labelling regulations and marketing regulations in place that allow us to market and promote nutrient-enriched crops to consumers, and very supportive government policy in many countries around the world. But there's this piece missing in the middle about grain trade. So if you were Olam or any other buyer of grain, how do you know what to ask your growers or where you get your grain from? How do you know what's the difference between a standard variety and the new nutrient-enriched variety? To the next slide, please. So importantly, why we need standards is that standards enable commercialization and scale. So in the video, we saw that we're actually now reaching nearly 50 million consumers worldwide, but how do we take that to the next scale above smallholder farmers into more commercial growing to be able to reach more people? We need that standard. So standards enable trade at more organized levels in the food system. So in medium-sized businesses and large-scale mills and processors. Importantly, public procurement. So whether you're buying food in the grain in the World Food Programme or the public distribution system in India, or you're buying foods for schools and hospitals, you want to be able to say exactly what you want when you're buying grain. And traders will use this standard to sell their product, to demand their products, and to promote nutrient-enriched crops all the way up and down the supply chain. And importantly, we know that this standard will lead to an increase in trade. And what we're all trying to achieve here is increased consumption of nutrient-enriched crops and a reduction in micronutrient deficiencies. So thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Jenny. That was really interesting. And you've begun to offer some perspectives on the food chain and standardisation and where the gaps are. I think Paul's going to be able to build on that for us. Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And I want to keep my comments specific to something I know, and that's rice. So if I think of rice and the importance of these standards and this technology, rice is feeding about 3.5 billion people around the world. And when you look at the FAO's malnutrition and where it exists in the world, it's about 65% crossover, where rice is a staple crop and where malnutrition exists. This is not the only solution to those problems, but it's probably one of the most promising. And that's because, as Jenny's video pointed out, and Jenny also said, we're able to touch the subsistence level of a farmer as well as the surplus producer through this technology. That surplus production, in order to monetize, in order to provide value back to the farmer, to incentivize more growth, requires industry standards so that we're able to communicate a consistent value proposition within our contracting. This avoids us having to price up or down on a bilateral basis, and instead allows for us to pull the standard into a contract and attach it to an addendum so that the customer knows exactly what they're getting. It allows us further to work with the seed companies into the farming systems to ensure consistent quality of the crop. Finally, it bridges our communication gap with governments, both on what the crop is, so they have a better understanding of what the offering is, as well as what the customer communications will be when it comes to on-pack. That further incentivizes uptake from our customers, who will want to report these benefits on so that their consumers can make an educated decision. So we're very excited about the technology, and more so excited to see this standardized so that we can start incorporating it into our commercial transactions.
Thanks, Paul. It's really good to hear a sort of live industry view on this. Inga, can you tell us a bit more about the policymakers' perspective on standardisation?
Sure. The former speakers already pointed out that a lot of people are malnourished. And in fact, the problem is that this number is growing. That is shown in the latest reports, that instead of it getting better, it's getting worse. And in fact, 1 in 3 people, so 1/3 of the global population, cannot afford a healthy diet. So although we really want people to eat healthy food, 1 in 3 can't afford healthy food. So staple foods is what they are eating. So to try to address the malnutrition problem through staple foods is a strategy which can address a lot of people. So in that sense, it is a strategy which is very interesting for policymakers. Secondly, I talk on behalf of the EU, and the EU has a new strategy, Farm to Fork strategy, which promotes healthy food systems, not only looking at healthy food in the sense of nutritious food, but also a completely healthy food system producing which is good for the environment. And in that sense, again, the nutrient-enriched crops are quite have a small footprint. They're drought resistant. They're disease resistant. So they're quite good foods to promote in a healthy food system, as well from an environmental point of view as from a nutritious point of view. So in that sense, it is an interesting crop for as well health policies as agricultural policies.
Thanks, Inga. And we've had a question through from Daniel Barlow, which kind of touched on organic foods seen as healthier and more sustainable, when it seems as though fortified foods may address many of these challenges. Can you explain any kind of difference on that in your understanding?
Did you ask me or?
Well, anybody, but you're right in front of me, so I asked you.
From the EU point of view, the healthy food systems, they certainly promote organic foods. They really want to reduce the amount of pesticides used and to work much better in a healthy way. In that sense, organic foods often don't, you take resistant foods who don't need that many external inputs. But a fortified food can be organically grown as well. So it is not that one crop is different from the other one. It's just that you have to find the right crop for the right environment.
That's really good for the lay people amongst us. I think it's really good to emphasise that fortified can also be organic. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Jenny, one of the questions we heard before the session, very general question, how's the PAS going to be adopted? Who are you hoping will use it?
It's very important, the users in commercial trade. And commercial trade also covers institutional buying. So even though when consumers are in a position where they're not actually buying the food themselves, they're receiving it through hospitals or prisons or emergency food assistance, it's still commercial transactions that have led to that consumer eating the food. So the main user of this PAS is commercial sellers and buyers of grain. And that's why it was so important to have OLAM on the committee, because if this standard doesn't work for them, it's pointless. This is all about having something that's readily available, easy to follow and easy to use when you're buying grain or selling grain. So if you're a grower, you can say, I have produced grain that conforms to PAS 233. I have produced rice that is nutrient enriched in zinc.
Thank you. Paul, how do you see nutrient-enriched crops gaining acceptance in the supply chain? Do you see this as a problem, potentially, or not?
No, so the nutrient-enriched crops are meeting a need, and wherever you have a need, you have demand. So I don't foresee a hindrance to uptake. Where we would see a slowing in interest would be upfront, and that would be around communication and awareness. So as a new technology coming to the market, first the customer, and by customer, I mean those people who will distribute this product into the market, need to be aware what the benefits are and need to understand where it fits into their product categories. The next piece of awareness needs to be around the consumer, and here we've already done some work. So Olam has fortified products in its value chain already, and what we tend to do is create awareness around the concept of diet first. What is it that you have available to you, and how is that important to your overall health? Once that awareness is there, then we tend to see a pull in the market towards more nutrient-enriched products. So I think this will fit in well with that narrative. We're also seeing, quite frankly, recently a pull in the market due to COVID. So people are seeking out more nutrient-enriched crops. One of the big three around the COVID experience that the consumers have been looking for is actually zinc, which is exactly what this standard speaks to. So zinc has picked up more of a narrative due to the immunological effects of that nutrient. So as a result, I would think this would actually see a fairly fast uptake because the awareness has been built around the current experience.
Thank you. And if we can stay with you for a second, Paul, do you think standardisation generally, that approach is going to help your organisation and other organisations to procure more nutritious grains? Do you think this is a field of work generally where it's going to help this process?
Exactly. I mean, if you think about standardization just generally, it's about a definition or a metric. So what it does is it provides clarity that everyone's using the same language and the outcomes are predictable against some threshold. So by having a standard in place, we'll be able to communicate not just to the seed growers that we expect to provide the right product to the farmers, but also from the farmers into the value chain so that the final customer is receiving a predictable good against a known definition. So standards are the grease by which the global trade works. And that's true whether it's a food safety standard, whether that's a tariff, whether that's a duty. It's the predictability in the market that makes the market work. So I can't overstate the importance of having a standard in place.
Thanks, Paul. And Jenny, if I can come back to you, what are your broader hopes in Harvest Plus in your organisation in relation to this PAS and ensuring a more effective food system and helping to reduce nutrition? Have you got a bigger picture, a bigger plan? Is this just the start?
Yes, most definitely. And with since the inception of Harvest Plus 17 years ago, we knew that standardisation and standards was an issue, and we couldn't sort of pinpoint which section in the value chain it was really holding us back. And now through all of this research over the years, we've realised grain trade is hugely important in the supply chain. We were nervous about the whole PAS process. Were we going to get everybody together to be able to come up with a consensus? And it was surprisingly, easy, because we got the right stakeholders to the table, and the right sort of minds working on this. And also, very important was that it was internationally representative. So now we know, how to actually pull the PAS together and get it out there. And also importantly now is spreading the word, getting people to use it internationally. We need to cover all of the nutrients of concern. So the nutrients that people are missing most globally are zinc, iron and vitamin A. They're the nutrients that are causing most of the problems with malnutrition, ill health, lack of ability to be able to learn and work, and unfortunately a large cause of death around the world. So they're the main nutrients of concern. So if we can find a standard for each of those nutrients that covers all of the major staples that everybody's eating, that's the bigger picture. And we're on that road. So the PAS for iron is now in public consultation. So we have that one up and running, and vitamin A will be completed by next year. So all being well, this time next year, we will have an international standard that covers the levels of nutrients in all of the major staples that everybody in the world consumes the most of.
Thank you. And just staying with you, if you don't mind, Jenny, I believe there are plans to get these PASs to be proposed into ISO as full standards. Is that correct?
Yes, and being really honest, and not being an ISO expert, I don't understand how that process works, and we need advice and help to be able to understand how ISO could help us reach more people. Now we've actually been able to standardise what nutrient enriched crops are. Ever more important to be able to elevate the standards and reach as many users as possible.
Absolutely. So this is really a shout out to our audience today. If you're sitting in a technical committee which has relevance to this, please talk to us. Get in touch. We'll talk to member bodies or individual experts and answer any questions. I think the idea at the moment is these PASs are out there, as Jenny says, and it gives us a chance to market test. It gives us a chance to see what's good in it, what's not so good in it and could be improved, where any areas of difficulty lie, and taking it to the ISO process would be the next step. But with a PAS preceding any ISO standard, we will have some evidence to build on, which I believe is a really useful thing to do. And as you say, Jenny, we've got this whole range of PASs in development which will cover all the key nutrients. So that's something for later. If I can turn to Inga now, why do you think, Inga, that the PAS and the process it describes is useful for governments and policymakers?
I think it is especially important for transparency and clarity. Up to now, there were always many questions about biofortification from concerned citizens, but also when a policy was started, it was not always clear what falls under biofortification or not. So I think it's very important to be very clear what you mean when you say we want to have a policy on or a strategy on nutrient-enriched crops. It's also very good for the government that they can clearly talk to the citizens to explain why they think it is important and what can be expected from it. So for transparency and clarity, it is essential.
Thank you very much. Is there anything any of you would like to add on why this work is so important, to take away for our audience, if you like? What are the benefits of these crops that we haven't touched on yet? Why is it important that we keep working in this area? Paul, maybe you can throw something in for us.
Yeah, so I was happy Jenny sort of brought up what the burdens in malnutrition are. And she's absolutely right, anemia and stunting. So zinc and iron are necessary in these diets. Olam has various pieces of its portfolio to deal with these issues. So this is going to be part of a larger nutrition strategy. But if you think about what this technology does, it allows for almost immediate scale. Olam won't have to invest in fixed capital, and the distribution would be equal to the yield in the area devoted to it. We're already seeing yield in area in crops, so this is really just a question of transitioning farmers to this technology. The more uptake we see out of it, the more scale we see, and the more scale, then the higher the level of nutritional solutions we have towards these issues. So what's exciting about this technology is scale and getting it into the fields for the farmers. And it is a very, once you sort of internalize that, a very cheap solution to take into the market. So you wouldn't expect it to have, say, a high premiumization versus other products in the market, which should allow it to compete well with conventional crops and see higher uptake.
Thank you. And then in the chat, Ronaldo asked about the importance of food safety, conformity assessment. Jenny, can you reassure people on the question of food safety? People are always very, very wary of new things being done to their food. We've heard all the conversations about genetically modified crops in the past. So if you'd like to say a little on that, I think people would welcome it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the PAS covers crops that have been developed through conventional plant breeding. There's lots of different technologies out there to improve nutrition. So anything from crop breeding, genetic modification, even feeding animals more nutritious food so they then have more nutritious meat. So there's lots of ways that you can make things more nutritious. And this one was specifically about conventional plant breeding. And there are other rules and regulations that do cover genetic modification or gene editing and those different technologies. So they're all well covered, and food safety is absolutely paramount. But this PAS was very limited in scope about the levels of nutrition that should be in these basic staples, and runs alongside of the relevant food safety standards and legislation.
Thank you. And staying with you, Jenny, Lena has asked, we understand the benefits of this technology, but what about the risks and what about the costs, especially in developing countries?
I think the risk is that we don't do this. It's an absolute, no-brainer to improve the basic staples that everybody eats every day. If you're getting 70% of your calories from rice, that rice has to be as high in zinc and nutrients as possible. So the risk is that we don't scale this up fast enough. As Inga mentioned, that the COVID has exacerbated the problem of micronutrient malnutrition, and the figures are actually getting worse, not better, as more people are plunged into poverty. So, the big risk is that we don't act and we don't do something quickly to improve the diets in developing countries. So, there are no drawbacks to this. I think, very importantly, the R&D costs of the crop development have been funded by the major donors, and huge thanks goes out to the UK government of FCDO, who've been a major supporter of biofortification, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as many other donors who are helping us to scale. So there's no cost to the consumer to this, because we knew we wouldn't be able to reach scale if farmers or consumers were having to pay any more for something that's extremely cheap anyway. If you haven't got any money to survive and you're just surviving on basic staples, even if it's 1 penny more on a daily basis, it will be prohibitive. So it's been essential to make biofortified commodities as the same price, if not cheaper, than what people are already consuming, to ensure that they are readily available for everybody. And that has then the knock-on benefit for the food industry and procurers who are buying a commodity that's the same price, if not cheaper.
Thank you ever so much, Jenny. And we are completely out of time. So I would just like to thank Jenny, Inga and Paul for sharing their expertise with us today. Thank you, participants, for being with us. Do get in touch. Get in touch with BSI through your member bodies or directly. And emerging countries, get involved in the ISO work once it gets going. It would be fantastic to have you there, so these questions can be discussed robustly and any concerns are laid out on the table and addressed. Thank you all and best of luck. Here's to ending malnutrition. Bye, everyone.